Assalamu alaikum, everyone. And I'm so pleased to be amongst you all again today. I think the last workshop, it was really fun to do. And I also received lots of messages afterwards, which really, really got me thinking. They got me thinking about parenting. They got me thinking about how much we really open up and talk about parenting in the community. They got me thinking about how much more support we really need for parents, and how, like a problem shared is sometimes a problem halved. And really lots of people had the chance to sort of open up and discuss parenting in a safe space for the first time. And I think it's so important that as parents or as people who know parents, that we always keep those safe spaces open, because they're so needed, especially in, the times that we're living in now. So without further ado, I'm going to share my screen and then we'll get started. As always, throughout the whole session, you are always able to to chat or to message me as the host. Any questions, any comments, and at some points, we're going to be asking some direct questions. So it'll be really good to get your thoughts then, okay? Okay, so Bismillah, so pandemic parenting. This session, we're going to really be just again, I think, setting the same intention, which is to sit together as parents or as people who have children in our lives, and really just to be aware of how mindful we are and how good our intentions are to do the best for our children, even when that's difficult and even when we don't manage to do it 100% of the time. In fact, as I will always say, nobody can ever do the right thing 100% of the time. But the fact that, we're here to learn, we want to do the best, that's more than good enough. The second thing we're going to do today is really reflect on our experiences of parenting in the pandemic. This is none of our parents had to parent through a pandemic. We never had any rule books to follow. We were all sort of doing it and finding out things as we went along. And I think it's been a really big deal, this pandemic. And this is our opportunity to take a step back and to really reflect about what it's meant to be a parent during these times. There are so many avenues that we could have explored, but the one that I really wanted to focus on in terms of the children themselves today was thinking about how to manage anxiety and big feelings, and also a little bit on how to talk to children about bereavement, because unfortunately that has been a reality for many, many people in our communities this year. And finally, and I think most importantly, we're going to really think about us as the parent, our own well-being, our stress bucket, and how we can ensure that we have the energy to keep going. Okay. So do some of you maybe want to send me a message in the chat and just tell me what kind of, like, how this year has been for you? I mean, I will start the sharing and I'll say, this has been a crazy year, has it not? Like, it's been a year where it started off, well, not now, I mean, since 2020, it started off relatively innocently. And then all of a sudden we were hit with this. Life changed almost overnight. And, we were all unsure. I think even as adults, we all experienced lots and lots of anxiety, especially in the beginning. There was, people were uncertain about what they needed to do, what risks they were under, what they could do to protect themselves. And then people started hearing news about, people in their families or their communities being unwell. At some points, it felt like the news was just on, all the time, and it was just spewing out figures, and the figures just kept getting worse and worse and worse. I think at some point during it, I decided that I was just not going to listen to the news anymore, and I would only get what I needed. Now and again, I've had someone message on the chat to say it was scary, and that's right. It was, so much of the year was scary, and scary is that feeling that we have when we are, we are dealing with something that's very unknown to us. And as parents, we've had to have our own feelings, but also manage the feelings of the children. And children have responded to this in very different ways. There are children who, I'd say, in fact, probably most children in the beginning were really excited about staying at home and missing school. But then slowly that started to move towards, be it boredom, be it anxiety, be it, fears about everything they were hearing on the television. And then when things started to open up, and that happened a few times, there was lots of separation anxiety as well, as children had to then go back to schools, or parents had to go back to work. There was lots of anxiety there. And I think that's definitely an experience that I've had with my own children. So as Sister Rakaya said, I work as a doctor. And so they've been very, very mindful of, or aware of the fact that, that might be a profession that's at higher risk. So there's definitely been lots of conversations about lots of big feelings this year. I'm just having a quick read. And someone has shared a story about their father, who was unfortunately diagnosed with an aggressive cancer this year, but that the pandemic was a blessing in disguise, because it meant that they got to spend time with the father and be there for him. And then he sadly passed away in October 2020. And we'll all remember him in our prayers tonight. Thank you for bravely sharing that story. And yes, it's been a year of hardship, but there has also been some silver lining, be it in terms of spending more time with family, as you mentioned in your story, or, people just getting to step away from life a little bit and to really think about what life means for them. And we're going to look at this image, okay? And I really like this image. I recently heard about it. And someone mentioned this. If you write in the chat, if you have any idea what this image is trying to say or what this image is about, I'll give you a moment and then I will carry on if nobody has an idea about it. One thing I always say in my presentations, just in case you wonder why I have awkward silences, is because whenever you ask a question, apparently you should always wait at least 7 seconds for people to answer before answering it yourself. So if I'm ever quiet for 7 seconds, you know why. Okay. See, the 7-second rule worked. Yes, someone said a stormy era. Someone said everything's unpredictable. That's both correct. The reason I like this image is because someone described the pandemic as being that we are all in the same storm, but we are all in different boats. And I think that's really correct. In the very beginning, there was chat about, oh, this pandemic is really leveling, like everybody is going through this together. The nation are all united. Everyone's been affected by the pandemic. And eventually, I think as time passed, people realized that really wasn't true. What I mean by that is, of course, it's correct and it's absolutely right that we have all been affected by COVID in one way or another, be it the children are now at home rather than at school, be it having to work from home rather than go to the office, be it family bereavements, be it having to obviously not see friends and family as much. But the truth is that our experience of the pandemic has each been so different. We're all in the same storm, but there will be some people who are in luxury ferries like P&O Cruise Ferry and have actually enjoyed this time and gained lots of benefit from this time and really have taken this time as a chance to connect with their families, take a step back, enjoy themselves a little, slow down a little bit. And there will be others who are on a tiny little dinghy or a rowing boat, people who themselves have experienced bereavement, or people whose home or family situations are really difficult and they've had to spend more time in that. Or there may be people who, for example, are doing this all alone, be it a single parent. We know that unfortunately sort of cases of domestic violence have gone up during the pandemic. So it's just to be mindful to know that whatever your personal experience of the pandemic is, it may be very, very different to someone else's personal experience of the pandemic. So whenever we talk about parenting today, I'm just going to be really aware of the fact that I come from my point of view and I come from my perspective, and there'll be no way that I could encapsulate the experiences of everybody or speak to the experiences of everybody. So please do forgive any shortcomings, but also share your experiences so that we're better able to understand. If any of you are fans of like Marie Kondo or, you know, those really organizing shows on television, you will know that one of the tips when you are doing a really huge clear out of your house is to make piles and to think about whether you, for every item you take, let's say you're organizing your wardrobe, it's to take all the clothes out and then to think, what do you want to donate? Like, what do you want to give away or throw away? And what do you want to keep? Okay. And now I'm going to ask you all to take a moment to reflect on your experience, your family's experience of the pandemic and of parenting in the pandemic. And I want you to write in the chat. Remember, you can always just write to the host. So it can be private. And when I share, I will never share your name. Think about your experience of parenting in the pandemic. And I want you to write to me some of the things that you want to keep and some of the things you want to throw away. So I will give an example of that as you write. So please feel free to start writing. Before the pandemic, we were very, very busy. So the children had clubs or extracurricular things that they would do every single day. And now that we've had all of those taken away, I've started to realize that actually that was a bit excessive. And so even when everything opens up again, I want to make sure that we have less busy stuff to do every week. So that's one thing I would want to keep from the pandemic, is just having a bit more downtime. One thing I'd want to throw away from the experiences of the pandemic is parenting alone. Like, you know, it's been just me and my husband. We've not had access as much as we usually do to the aunts and uncles and grandparents that bring so much value and joy and, you know, meaning to my children's life. And it has been really tough to have had almost, you know, a year without them. So that's definitely something I would want to, you know, throw away after the pandemic. I've had some answers. Someone said that since they worked, since the children were very young, they've actually really appreciated having time spent at home with the children. That is, alhamdulillah, that is such a blessing. Someone has said, appreciating the really simple pleasures, e.g. a walk or a park or nature. And it's true, isn't it? Because we've not been allowed to do anything like what we usually do, you know, the really high entertainment stuff, the restaurants, the cinemas, the theme parks. We've all just been to parks much more than we ever had in our life. And I think just enjoying those little things is something to take away. Oh, I really, really relate to something someone said. They've said what they would, something that they're taking away is that not excessively going to places with kids, which would drain me mentally, especially toxic mum and tots groups. And I agree. For some reason or another, lots of us do things that make us feel really not so great. Like, and we do them. I think we do them because we feel like we need to do them. Like that's the right thing to do as a parent. And I remember as well dragging my children along to tons of different things where we would feel totally rotten afterwards. But it was just that we had to do it. And we've been freed of that in a way. So thank you for sharing that. And again, throwing away that isolated feeling and that helplessness. And, you know, I just want to tell you that we all relate to how that feels this year. Everyone has had times and moments of feeling really, really alone. Another comment here about having more time to spend with the family, and making more of a habit of going out more together. Beautiful. And because our families, we have lots of layers of families, don't we? So my daughter calls it the small family, which is just mum, dad, and her brother. Then the medium family, which is the aunts and uncles and grandparents. And then you have your large family, which includes your cousins and everything. And it's true, we've spent all our time this year in our very, very small nuclear families. And, some of us have got to know each other a little bit better, which is nice. And some of us have, of course, found out that actually that doesn't really work for us, and we need the support of the rest of the family to keep going. Oh, wow. Someone's mentioned that they formed a group with children from within the community and did online activities with them all. And they would like to continue that even after the pandemic and maybe even take it outdoors. Wow. So well done for, life gave you lemons and you made lemonade and you've managed to form a community out of this time. Someone said, before, my life was a rat race and the pandemic made me change my job, which has really helped me as I have a lot more time with my family and less stressed. Another really interesting experience. And, I think the pandemic gave everyone permission to just slow down for a little bit, or not permission, it forced us to slow down for a little bit and to really, really reflect on what was important. I shared this story with the children from Jaffaria Academy last week, but I thought I'd share it with you now because this made me think this. My son is not interested in football, but he sometimes pretends to be because it's, the done thing if you're a boy. And he's actually much more interested in things like chemistry and science and maths, which, probably isn't as socially acceptable, but it's what brings him joy. Over the last 12 months, he has not mentioned football once. And he has been so joyful just doing all these quirky things that he really enjoys. And it was only the night before he went back to school that before he went to bed, he said, Mum, can you sign me up to a football club? And so it must have been that he remembered again, like what society expects of you. And therefore, let's immediately try and fit that mold again. And I think it was beautiful for them to have had the chance to just be themselves for almost a year. Okay, let's go back to here. One moment. Okay, so we said we were going to, that was the bit of our presentation, which was really reflecting on the pandemic, the highs, the lows. We've had so many different experiences today. And the next bit is going to be about, even though for many people school is back, for some people school continues to be online, but for many people school is back, and which means that for many people life has started to feel a tiny bit more normal again. The truth is that this is with us still, and it will be with us still for a while. So I think it's still important to touch on managing anxiety and having a think about big news and bereavements. I showed this slide briefly last week, but I really wanted to just come to it again because it really summarizes so much in just one small slide. And the idea is that when a child is having really big emotions, your job there in that moment is to be the calm presence that allows them to feel that emotion and then to go back. Remember we said about the brain and the downstairs brain and the upstairs brain, giving them time to regulate themselves emotionally so that they can come back to thinking, okay? And in the same way, as we said, a mother will hold a crying baby and the baby will eventually be soothed by her calm presence. If you were really flustered and, upset and crying yourself, the baby is unlikely to stop crying. Children need that too, okay? Children need that too. And in fact, adults need that too as well, okay? Anytime you need someone to calm down, you yourself need to be calm in their presence so that eventually you co-regulate and they calm down with you. So whenever a child is having a really big feeling, be it a huge feeling about anxiety just before going to school, be it a tantrum, be it some, a sibling rivalry, whatever it may be, it's about accepting that feeling, not trying to pack it away. I've got someone, a relative who the moment a child will fall, they'll be like, look, there's an airplane flying past. And it stops them crying immediately. But of course, all you've done is distracted and packed that feeling away. Whereas no, we want to accept the feeling. We want to give that feeling time. We want to keep them safe during it. We want to then really actively listen to them. Okay, and we're going to talk about some listening skills. And we're going to stay calm ourselves until eventually that child calms down and joins us in our place of calm. Okay, so we're not distracting away from big emotions. And the reason we're not distracting away from big emotions, even though it does work, look, it will stop a child from crying if you distract them. The reason is that big emotions are a part of life and you need to learn how to cope with them because you're going to have them forever and you don't want to always distract. As adults, there are so many of us who distract away from our big emotions, you know, like I'm having a big emotion, let me go and eat, or I'm having a big emotion, let me go and smoke, or whatever it may be, because we're not used to sitting with that big feeling and working through it. And that's what we want to try and achieve for our children, that big, scary feelings, you know, that you can manage them, you can work through them, and you can get out of the other side as well. So a few tips here, and these cartoons are 100% taken from an amazing book, which I'm sure many of you will have heard of because it's probably one of the oldest parenting books out there, called How to Talk So That Children Will Listen and How to Listen So That Children Will Talk. And this book is beautiful, okay, because it really, really summarizes the communication techniques with children. And then it has these cartoons after every chapter, which summarize the whole chapter in a few images. And there are a few summaries of the book available online if you don't have the time or resource to read the book. But one idea is when a child is talking to you, then you should listen fully, okay? Listen fully, which means we look, we listen, and we give them our attention, okay? This thing, I think, you know, children in the future, when they remember their parents' faces, unfortunately, they're going to remember us looking like this, okay? Because, you know, unfortunately, most of them have grown up with parents who've been looking at their phones for a large percentage of the time, okay? The thing that scares me about that is that this is a very new thing. Like our parents didn't have phones when we were young. So I don't think we even know the impact that this is going to have till later. So remembering that if a child wants to talk, we give them our attention fully with our eyes, our ears, and our heart. Now, let's be real. We're not going to do that every single time. If they're just talking about, you know, if it's a random thing, if they've been going on forever, we don't need to do that all the time, you know, because, you know, it's not realistic. But if it's ever a big feeling, okay, so especially if they want to talk to you about something that's upset them, or they want to talk to you about something that's really brought them joy, in those moments, connect at that level, okay? They say that one of the roles of parents is to match a child's energy, okay? So if you see your child is really upset about something, to feel that feeling with them. But similarly, if your child is super excited, like, oh, mom, look at this picture, and you're like, oh, that's nice, then, you know, you've not matched their energy either. So that's as much, you know, that's another time when you need to, again, be fully listening and really giving them that attention. One of the other listening skills discussed in this book is about really listening rather than interrogating. And this was a really major revelation to me. So there's a wonderful sister in our community called Azra Hassan Ali who runs Babble and chat classes, which I would recommend you look up if you have young children. And one of the things that she mentioned, and again, complete revelation, was do not ask children too many questions, okay? We tend to believe that we're showing interest by asking lots of questions, okay? But in fact, asking less questions and listening more or making more statements about what the child is saying is a much more helpful strategy to get them to open up and to talk more. And again, another really, really big one mentioned in the book is about validating and naming feelings. So children have a totally different, perspective on life to what we do. And sometimes to a child, something might be a really big deal, and to us, it might really not be a big deal. Like, for example, I'm sure many of you will have experienced this. Like, if a biscuit breaks in half, some children will find that greatly upsetting, even though as adults, we know that it's still the same amount of biscuit. Okay. It doesn't matter if we think that's not important in the least. What matters is that that child believes it's important. Okay. So validating that feeling means not brushing it away. And naming that feeling means telling the child what they're feeling. So, for example, oh, you were really, really hoping that we would be able to go to the park today, but now it's raining and we can't go. You must be feeling disappointed. Okay, so giving a name to that feeling will eventually help the child to name their feelings themselves with time, which is really important because, come on, again, as adults, how many of us just sometimes feel really, really disturbed, but just don't know exactly what it is that's going on inside? So bringing a child up, teaching them the names of feelings, what it feels like to have that feeling, in your body, in your mind, and how you can eventually coach your way out of that feeling is a really, really useful skill. We're now going to maybe just have a breather and have a look at the chat just to see if anyone wanted to say anything. I think we're okay. I'm now, again, at any point, if there are any questions, if you want me to repeat anything, or if you have any personal experience or comments, please do share, because I find that in these sessions, the most valuable things are the things that you share as the participants. Now we're going to talk about a few strategies. I want to talk about 2 practical strategies for dealing with a child who might be very anxious in this moment, as in, like, right now, they're feeling really anxious. We're going to talk about 2 strategies. And then we're going to talk about 2 strategies for how to deal with anxiety generally, as in a child who is generally quite anxious, 2 things to teach them about how to manage their anxious feelings now and in the future. Okay. These strategies 100% are also applicable to adults. Okay. And I will share, again, as always, I like to be very open with you in these sessions. I'll be sharing examples of when we've used these strategies and different times that they've helped. So again, now managing anxiety in the moment. So example is, imagine that you've turned up to school and your child needs to come out of the car and go into school, and they suddenly feel really, really worried about going down. Or your child may need to recite something in public and they're feeling very, very panicky about doing that. Okay. One of the ways that we can make our mind feel calm is to make our body feel calm. So as you know, our bodies and our minds are, completely related and interlinked. And if you want to calm your mind, you can sometimes trick your mind to calm down by totally calming your body down. Okay. So someone said that their son has a fear of crowds. So that's a good example to use. So let's imagine you're going to be going into a crowd and the child is feeling very worried about that. Okay. We take a moment. Okay. And again, we listen, we validated the emotions. I know you don't like really busy places. Lots of people find really busy places a bit worrying. Don't worry. I'm going to stay with you throughout this. And let's try and do a breathing thing to calm ourselves down before we go in. So the best way to calm your body down very quickly, to trick your mind into calming down, is to connect with your breathing. There are hundreds of breathing techniques. I've tried a lot of them, but the one that for some reason just seems to stick is this one called the starfish hand. So you take your hand out like this and you use your finger to go up and down and up and down your fingers. And as you go up, you breathe in. And as you go down, you breathe out. And I know this is cringy, but let's all do that right now. Okay, many of you are lucky enough to have your videos off, so you don't need to feel embarrassed about doing it. But let's all do a hand of starfish breathing and let's see how we feel afterwards. If anyone wants to type how that made them feel free to go ahead. In general, people feel that it slows them down. Like I myself now feel like my heart's beating a little bit less. I feel much slower, calmer. Okay. So anytime you feel really, really anxious, a hand of starfish breathing. Okay. This is a technique you can do yourself because as adults, we will have anxiety provoking situations all the time. And this is a technique you can easily teach your children. And I'd say you can probably teach it to a child aged about 3 or 4 and above. Okay. With practice, then you don't need to actually do the starfish hand because you will just know how quickly and slowly you need to breathe. But in the beginning, it could be quite useful to actually do it on the hand because what you're really aiming for is that slow breathing in and out. Okay. Sometimes when we teach our children methods like this, it can take quite a long time for it to actually seep through. So I'd say that I've probably been doing starfish breathing with my son for 2 years or more. And every single time I've tried it has always been resisted, because boys don't want to do that. And it's a bit, embarrassing or something. So it's always been resisted, but eventually we will do it together. And so I thought that it wasn't getting through at all, that this starfish breathing, I'm just doing it, but it's not working, but let me just do it anyway. Until about 10 days ago, I had a moment where something happened at home and basically one of the pieces of flooring broke and I got a bit panicky about that. And I was worried about the flooring having broken because it was new. And then my son came up to me and he said, "Mum, let's go to the sofa and sit down and do a hand of starfish breathing." And so we sat and we did it and it calmed me down. And it also made me realize that, oh my goodness, after all that time, it had seeped through. Okay. So it took a really long, well, the point of the story is to say it can take a really long time for these habits to get instilled. But, if we instill them in childhood, then inshallah, they will remain for a long period of time. Another example, and this is for maybe a little bit more of a panicky attack. If you've ever seen someone have a panic attack or if someone is really, really worried, or in fact, this is a really good one for the fear of crowds that someone mentioned. If you're ever getting very, very worried, what you want to do is you want to immediately remind yourself of where you are and the fact that you are safe in this moment. Okay. This is a technique that is called grounding. And it's actually used with people who've experienced trauma, but it's really helpful, I find, at any moment where someone is feeling very anxious. Okay. You can even do it before you go into an exam or in any moment where you feel really anxious. It's called 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. You name 5 things that you can see in the room. So you have to look around the room and you have to actually say or encourage your child to say the name of 5 things that you can see. Then 4 things that you can touch, and ideally you should also go and touch them. So you say, for example, I can see a cup, you go and touch the cup. So I can touch a cup, I can touch a pen, I can touch a cushion, I can touch the window. 3 things that you can hear. This starts to get a bit harder. 2 things that you can smell. Again, it gets a bit harder. And 1 thing that you can taste. Okay. And what you'll find when you do that activity is slowly, the person comes out of their head and starts to remember where they are in this room, grounded, feeling like they're back in the moment. And it's a really good technique to help terminate a panic attack if that's what someone's having, okay? So try these 2 techniques and see how you feel. And now, I said that I would also mention 2 techniques that are not so much for the moment, because these techniques need a bit more thinking. And remember what we said, which is that when you're having a really big emotion, you are not thinking in that moment. So these techniques are not for the moment when you're feeling really anxious, but it's a sort of a thinking pattern to try and get into to help with anxiety that's more long term. Someone's asked, do you get up and go to smell what you say you can smell? I think that would be a good one. Yeah. So they mention it mostly about the touch and the taste. Of course, if it was something that was safe to taste, then yes, you can taste it as well. That would definitely make it a lot more grounding. But if it's a public place or you're unable to do that easily, then don't worry about it. But the touch is the more important one. Some people mention, like, instead of the last one, which you can taste, they say, and one deep breath, okay? Or you can say, and one deep breath and a la ilaha illallah, or like, adding in a little religious element to remind you about who is really in control of the situation right now. Thank you for that question. So here, the 2 thinking techniques that are really helpful for if you generally feel quite worried, and they're good techniques to teach children as well, okay? So one is the worry tree. And it's when we start to worry, when we notice that we're feeling worried, so we feel that, we're feeling unclear in our mind, our heart's racing, we might be feeling a bit sweaty. I always describe it as feeling like you have a washing machine that's going round and round in your body. You think, what is it that I'm worrying about? And can I do something about it? This is the main question. Is it something that I can control? Okay. If it's something that you can't control, then just let it go. I know it's easier said than done, but this is, again, it's a habit, like the breathing, like anything. And the more we practice, the more we get into the habit. So if there's nothing that we can do about it, we let it go. Okay. If we're worrying about, for example, what is my boss going to say tomorrow? Or is the teacher going to tell me off tomorrow? Then there's nothing we can do about that right now. So we just let it go. If in fact it is something that we can do something about, then we need to make a plan. If we're going to do something about it, when are we going to do something about it? Are we going to do it now? In which case, let's do it and stop worrying. Or in fact, if we can't do it now, then when are we going to do it? Are we going to do it later? Okay, let's do it later and then stop worrying. So at the end of all the options in the tree is like, okay, now let the worry go. The worry can go either because there's nothing you can do about it, or because you're going to do something useful about it, or because you're going to do something useful about it later. Okay, so this is the worry tree, and it's a really good one to practice thinking about for yourself. First, try it for yourself for worries that you're having. And when you feel confident with it, then only then can you introduce it to your children, okay? And eventually with time, it should become more natural. Someone has said about 13-year-olds, these can work. All these techniques are actually techniques that are also used in adults. So for example, maybe not the starfish hand. With that, you might want to do square breathing or just in and out breathing slowly if starfish is a bit childish for them. But the 5-4-3-2-1 method is actually a method that we use with adults in psychiatry who have experienced trauma. So that's definitely one that can be used with a 13-year-old. Shouldn't be too cringy. And the worry tree, again, is one that's used for adults as well. So inshallah, those should be useful for an older child. And the other one here, the other thinking tool to sort of get into the habit of, both for ourselves and for our children, is just thinking about what's in our control. Like when we find a situation is worrying us, to really think about what's in our control and what's not in our control, and letting go of things that are not in our control. So let's think, for example, about coronavirus as an example, okay? So what is not in my control? What's not in my control is, is the government going to have enough Pfizer vaccinations? When is it going to be my turn to be vaccinated? What is going to be the next step that Boris Johnson announces? When am I going to be able to go on holiday? All of those things are not in my control. Okay, so for me to start worrying about them now, or for for my child to be worrying about them, it's just going to be taking up our mental space, and there's nothing we can do to affect the outcome. If in fact we think about what is in our control, and that's some people call it your like focus of power, like your power lies in the area where you have control, okay? And stay in there and you will continue to feel powerful. So what are the things that I can control about coronavirus? I can control, if I'm feeling anxious, that I'm not going to listen to the news. I can control, if I'm feeling anxious, that I'm going to, for example, get tested more frequently if I live in an area where that happens. I can control that I want to limit visitors and, follow government guidelines at all times about, visitors. I can control that I want everyone in my family to wash their hands before they come into the house. So you just think about what it is that you can control and stay within that, okay? Because always, we all tend to worry more about what we can't control more than what we can. Again, any comments, type them away. I'm just going to have a quick sip of water. And I'm not going to spend too much time on this slide, which is talking to children about death, because I actually think this is a topic that our community really needs a lot of education and time spent thinking about. So inshallah, I really hope that in the future, we'll be able to do more specific sessions about this subject, which is incredibly important. And I want to give it its full justice, okay? But for now, the main thing I want to say about talking to children about death is the most important thing is to be honest with children, okay? Lots of people say things to children like, Uncle X went to sleep, or, Grandfather Y has gone back to Iraq, or, they've gone to heaven. What we need to do is we need to use really, really clear words, because there have been instances where children have just been left really confused for a really long period of time. I've seen instances of children, for example, having sleep problems because they heard that, X went to sleep and they just never came back. So then they become afraid of sleeping, okay? So it's very important that we use the proper word of, death or died with children, and we explain that to them in age-appropriate language. And it's important to always, again, like the roller coaster we discussed last time, and anyone who wasn't there, I'll repeat the idea. It's the idea that a child can deal with anything as long as they have somebody to really explain things and be with them along the way. In the same way that you can go totally upside down on a roller coaster and be absolutely fine because you have a seatbelt. So children can cope with death. Okay, and they can cope with hearing news about death as long as they have an adult alongside them who will be there to feel those big feelings with them and to let them really express them. And wherever possible, involving children, allowing them to attend, for example, be it the mosque ceremony, again, all pending COVID restrictions. But I mean, getting them involved in events where the person is being remembered, because it's important for them as well to be a part of that process. And one thing to mention about children, because many people don't know this, is that in death, children do this thing called puddle jumping, which is that they can move between emotions really, really quickly and completely unlike an adult, okay? Which means that you can tell a child that someone has died and they could be really, really upset. And the next moment, they could just be playing their Lego. And then a few days later, they may be really upset again. And then the moment after, they might just be painting. And that's normal. That's not the child being insensitive or uncaring or, pathological. That's a normal emotional response in a child. They can jump between emotional states really quickly. And that's almost the normal state for them. I remember as a You know, many years ago, I went to the funeral of a friend's father, and the friend had a much younger sister, and she was probably about 7 or 8 at the time, and she was just running around playing in the mosque. And I thought, goodness, how insensitive of her. And it was only later when I did training on bereavement that I realized that that's exactly what she was doing. She was just puddle jumping, and that's completely, completely normal for a child of her age. Okay. So now, as we come into the last bit of the session, I really want us to think about ourselves. So for now, we're going to pack our children and put them aside for a minute. We're going to really think about ourselves and our own well-being. I showed this last time. It's such an overused metaphor, but I believe it's just so useful. And we're just going to remind ourselves again that in the same way that in an aeroplane, if you were to put your child's oxygen mask first, it's very likely that you would faint before you were able to help other children or yourself. Whereas if you were to put your own oxygen mask, you would be able to keep going until you had the time to help everyone else. It's just to remind us all that as parents, we need to look after ourselves, because that's the only way that we can help others. And again, it's one of those generational differences where you will rarely find parents of the older generations than us, so our parents and above. You will rarely find them ever talking about self-care. And in fact, you will more likely find lots of sort of, appreciation for that sort of martyrdom spirit of having given everything up and, done everything for everyone else and had nothing for themselves. Whereas now we're growing to realize that, in fact, the more we look after ourselves, the more we are able to serve others. This is something which I was really hoping could be interactive, but I think due to the time, then maybe we'll do it interactive, but also talking at the same time. And it's called the stress bucket. And it's a really helpful tool for thinking about our own well-being. I probably describe the stress bucket to patients like multiple times a day. But the idea is, okay, that we all have a bucket of stress, like a bucket that we are able to carry stress in, okay? And we all have a limited capacity in our bucket. Now, some of us, there are some people who have really big buckets. You know, those people who can do everything at the same time. Like there are people who can do lots and lots and lots at the same time before they get stressed. They may have a big bucket. There are others who need to do things one by one. They might have a small bucket. The size of the bucket, in fact, does not matter really, okay? What matters is that we all have this bucket, and then we have stress that is poured into it. And stress can be from anything. Stress could be thinking about what to cook tomorrow. Stress could be being in your overdraft or like financial, problems. Stress could be thinking about your children's health. It could be, having to homeschool. Stress could be anything. There are lots of stresses that will be going into our bucket at all times, okay? Unless we find a way to turn on a tap and get rid of that stress, then what will happen is our stress bucket will overflow, okay? And when it overflows, that's when we feel really anxious, we feel low in mood, mental health issues can occur, or we might have real sort of effects to our well-being, okay? So the important thing is we need to find how to open up the tap, okay? As I said, we can't really control how big our bucket is. And in many cases, we can't really that much affect what kind of stress is going into our bucket. But the bit that's in our hands, the locus of our control here, is opening up the tap and seeing how much we can get rid of, okay? So that tap is your coping mechanisms and your self-care, and really thinking about what it is that you do that makes you feel better, okay? So can I, again, in the chat, I just want people to maybe type something up. Be it, you can either write things that are going into your stress bucket or your tap, your ways of getting things out of your stress bucket. Okay, so it'll be really interesting to have some contributions on, be it things that are stressing you, or be it the coping mechanisms you have to open the tap out at the bottom. I'm so happy to see this orange flash. Someone's mentioned that reading. So reading is there. Amazing. I love that one. Thank you so much. One of my taps is one, I love reading too, but I used to really, really, really love reading in coffee shops by myself. That was my thing. That was how to refresh. And the truth is that during the lockdown, lots of our normal coping mechanisms have unfortunately been taken away. Okay. So again, someone here has written spending time with their family. Okay. For lots of us, that is a coping mechanism, and it's been taken away, unfortunately. So we do need to, where one thing has been taken away, we need to think about where other things can come in. Someone's written fixing sleep deprivation, having time alone, spending time walking alone, staying close with nature, stepping outside for a short walk, having their hair cut, tons of things. Amazing. I really like these. I really, really like these. And it's really like, take a moment. This is what I want, what I'm going to do as homework for the end of the session. But really take a moment to think about what it is that works for you. Some people know this very obviously for themselves, but other people, it takes a lot more exploration to work out what it is that really makes them feel better. And I'm just going to show you this next graph, because even though it's a bit over the top, I think it's still a useful thing. Okay. What we're looking at on this graph is our, let's say, our wellness, how good we feel. Okay. So in general, if you look at the beginning, we're up and down. There are some things that trigger us. Okay. But in general, we tend to go back up to our normal baseline. We have our routine. And then we will all, before we have a crisis, everybody has early warning signs that they are starting to feel bad. And everybody's early warning signs are different, okay? But one of the things you want to identify for yourself, and really take some time to reflect on you, and maybe if you are in a marriage, then maybe also have a think as a couple about each other, okay? What are the signs that things are starting to get bad? Not that they've completely crashed, but they're starting to get bad. And when you know that things are when you see those signs, that's the time to start putting in your wellness tools and all your coping mechanisms so that your line doesn't go completely down, but that in fact you manage to recover it a bit, okay? So for example, one of my, I'll share, one of my early morning signs is that little things that don't usually annoy me will start to annoy me. So let's say having any dishes in the sink, usually I'm okay with that. But when I start to get really irritated about every dish that's in the sink, then I know that that means I need to start my coping mechanisms, okay? And my coping mechanisms, again, I'll share, is that I'll go to bed early for 3 nights in a row. And that in most cases tends to help. So I found that going to bed early is a huge coping mechanism for me, okay? And again, so this is the stuff that's really important to reflect on for yourself, which is what are your particular, your specific and your personalized signs that things are starting to get bad? And what are, again, your very particular specific things that you need to feel better again, okay? Again, someone's mentioned going out for a quick walk. Walks seem to be featuring in a lot of people's. Oh, someone said that their warning sign is that they go really quiet. Yeah, that's a good one. Becoming quieter. Oh, someone else has said that. How interesting. Definitely. Yeah, I can't relate with quiet people. Joking. But as in, I'm not a quiet person myself. But I do know that people who are quiet, when they start to go really, really quiet, that's a really, really important sign. And in fact, if someone's not quiet at all and they suddenly are going quiet, then that's a really important sign to pick up as well. Okay. So really think about what it is and then what it is that you need to have done. And it's important to discuss this as a couple, because, for example, me and my husband discussed this recently because we suddenly discovered that our things may be really different. You know, like one person may want, as soon as they're feeling low, may want the other person to talk to them lots and give them lots of talking time and listen to them forever. And the other person may want, in fact, just to be left alone for a bit, to just gather their own thoughts by themselves. So it's really important to know what it is for yourself and for others that are important in your life, so that you can support them in the way that they need. Having a quick look at the chat. Again, someone else has said that their early warning sign is when unimportant things irritate them, like things the husband or children say. Yep, definitely. When like that irritability where like every single thing is now really annoying is a really good sign. Okay. And then if you want to be, look, I think some people, okay, are able to keep this all up in their heads, like what their early warning signs are, what their self-care mechanisms are, okay? But one thing I would really recommend is, if you are that way inclined, or in fact, as a general recommendation, is to maybe really think about writing it down. The reason is because, as we know, writing things down really helps us to remember them. But the other reason is because when we start to feel like, if we miss those early warning signs, and if we in fact drop down into crisis, at that time, we're not able to think very clearly, okay? So having written down our plan is a very useful tool for us to be able to then refer to think about how we can get ourselves out of it, okay? So I myself have written down my plan, okay? And my plan includes what I know my early warning signs are, and what I know I need to feel better, and also who I know I can talk to. Because I know that when I feel, if I am in a crisis, I suddenly feel, for no reason at all, because it's not true, but I suddenly feel like there's nobody I can talk to in the whole world about this. Whereas I've written on my plan, like, remember that you can talk to X, Y, and Z. And that just, you know, it just reminds me in that moment to go and do that, okay? When we start to feel lower or more anxious, we start to lose our motivation, okay? So having it written down forces yourself to remember to do those things that you know to do to bring yourself slowly up again. And again, I'd love to hear in the chat if anyone else feels like this wellness plan is something that they would relate to or that they would find helpful. And there is a website, I'm going to put it up at the end, where you can actually print out a plan and fill it in. And it might be a really interesting activity to do, be it by yourself or be it with your partner, to really learn so much about each other and about each other's coping mechanisms, and really know how to support each other when needed. Great, someone's saying that it looks helpful. So I'll give you the link at the end. And it's remembering that there are things that you can do to make yourself feel better, which will take a few moments. There are those that will take a few minutes, and there are those that will take a few hours. So we're not talking about necessarily everything has to be like a huge bath with candles, or like going out for a full day's walk by yourself, because that's not always going to be realistic. Some of them are just really short, you know, like, for example, going out into sitting in a room by yourself and having a cup of tea, okay? Or watching something, you know, watching a documentary or a movie that you enjoy. So they don't all need to be fancy. And in fact, the really day-to-day ones are probably the more useful ones. And again, some ideas here: tea, sleep, watching something interesting, having time to yourself, getting out of the house. Getting out of the house is a huge one, especially when the days are so short and many of us don't even see the sun at all. Yoga, meditation, or of course we would add dua, or, you know, listening to something that really speaks to your heart. We have lots of options here, and just think about what it is that works for you. And here for the final slide, it's to say that, remember, that graph I showed you, that's normal, okay? Everybody goes through ups and downs, and everybody has crises when they go really down, but then come up again, okay? If, however, you find that you've gone down and you're not able to get yourself up again, and especially if you find that that's lasted for 2 weeks or more, then that is the time to seek professional help, okay? I speak as a GP, so I do have a, ulterior motive here, which is please do go and speak to your GPs if you feel that you've been struggling with this for a while. We are meant to be there for your mental health as well as your physical health. So, and nothing you can ever tell your GP will be something they haven't heard before. So if you need help with anything like this, do speak to your GP or Google NHS talking therapies. Talking therapy is freely available for everybody, and you can refer to them yourself. So you don't need a letter from your GP or anything like that. You can self-refer. And there are lots and lots of really good charitable organizations which provide counseling and support as well. You can find some of them through Hub of Hope, and you can find some of them by searching the Muslim Counselors and Therapists Network. And again, just remember that parenting is a huge journey. Nobody does it perfectly at all, okay? And if you want to learn more about parenting, there are lots of parenting courses out there. There's hand-in-hand parenting, which I have done myself and which I highly recommend, run by Sister Shaheen Murali. And again, Brent Council, Harrow Council, lots of the local councils run parenting courses. And I know that Brent aren't doing them at the moment, but Harrow are still offering them online, and you don't even need to live in the borough to go to them, okay? So that is me.